Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Lehr with me, host Imperial Day. And the topic of today is the SU76, the Soviet light assault gun. Not a unit you see very often, partly because it serves in the same building as the SU85 and the Katyushas. In that regard, some people seem to think, well, it's not really as durable as the SU85, nor does it really do the same damage. And at the same time, it doesn't have rockets like the Katyusha, so I'm not really going to bother with it. But in many ways, it's actually a pretty good unit if you understand some of the core concepts behind it, its strengths and its weaknesses. And overall, while yes, it might not with every shot do a lot of damage, it might not with every shot be able to penetrate a lot, what it does have, on the other hand, is the high range, a high rate of fire, and of course, free artillery. Which again can be, in this case, quite handily tearing apart a German infantry squad, as we noticed here. And again, it is free, you can use it every bleeding damn time you want. So in that regard, it should not be underestimated. Then unfortunately, the SU85 allowed the infantry to get a bit close there. My fault. But still, handy little weapon. And again, perhaps not so individually fearsome, but when it comes to the SU76, you don't just want one, and I think that's sort of a problem. A lot of players will say that, well, it's pretty cheap, therefore I should only get one, when clearly the train of thought should be, it's pretty cheap, I should get a bunch of those. Same thing behind the T-3476, but I'll be making a video about that one later on. No, the SU76... light assault gun, it has the exact same range as the S76 or the S85. On the other hand, it doesn't quite have the same direct amount of firepower, nor is it quite as durable. But again, for every SU85 you can get 2 SU76s. In that regard, you might be able to come up with a few tricks and different tactics with it. And also another thing to remember about it, it veterans up much faster than the SU85, which is also quite a handy ability. But again, that artillery. Also a bit of Soviet German Air Force coming in there. And there we go, fascists are moving in, and once more again, firing the artillery. In the hopes of catching someone. Though with a little less luck than usual, but still, overall again, not wasting a single resource here, and even then my SU76 can fight on in other roles, I'll tell you now. I've planned to that, but then again, I might also be moving up a second SU76, and that's where things really begin to get interesting once you're adding the second one. Once you really begin sort of getting that mass effect in, that quantity over quality effect. And again, it also puts a lot of stress on your opponent when all of a sudden he just doesn't have one unit but several units barraging him. It has a very particular psychological effect. It really puts a lot of pressure on them. So in that regard, it also has a little side effect in that regard, which should not be underestimated either. And here I'm actually cocking up with my SU85, by the way. I'm admittedly at fault there. And again, note high rate of fire. In this case, he actually is popping smoke to get his shady crosswind over there. Nicely done. Nasty Panzerfaust there. We're seeing a pack moving up, by the way, somewhere. They're not really relevant. But again, several SU76s laying down not a fine again. Fresh barrage. They may quickly fire off, and then Veterancy 2. There's even less time. They basically get a 25% decrease there to the cooldown, which is also quite useful. SU85 here is going to go down, by the way, due to my inform. There we go, we're seeing a Panzer IV command tank moving in. Hardly going to be the most direct threat though to the SU76, mind you, but still even then. And another barrage, this time after the howitzer. The Fierce Panzer moving in. Fires away, and then we got the SU76 turn about. Panzer IV command tank can't seemingly hit, but there we go, firing away. And again, individually, perhaps not the most impressive thing. Apparently the Panzer IV command tank isn't either, but that's another story. Entirely different story. But even then, in active forces, my opponent here is a bit cautious. with his command tank, even in his own territory. And then we get all of a sudden, we get a bit more of a volley effect, and all of a sudden he's actually forced to pull away. Since again, it's going to happen a lot faster now. There's actually a risk of losing a tank. So, sort of the first little visual demonstration again, sort of the basics again. You want numbers. You want numbers. You don't want an individual SU76 fighting. It's where numbers they sort of really get impressive. Same with artillery. They'll go on individually. They do a bit better with artillery even then. I mean, if you can really get that barrage effect in whether you can really stress out your opponent, you can break up an assault since you'll basically be hammering in the same area with a lot of artillery. So again, there are a lot of little uses to it, and of course even then you also get tracking, so again in that regard you can get them a bit more than that way, and even use it to spot for say an SU85 you might have later on if you actually decide to bother with it, or just focus solely on SU76s. I mean, nothing wrong in mixing things up a bit, but even then, if you do want SU76s, get more of them. But also I'll be showing off a few little other tricks to them, so let's move a bit ahead. And now, on the other hand, we get a bit more of an actual opponent rolling in. We've got the Panzerkampfwagen 4 on the way. And let's see what happens here. Panther 4 rolls in. There we go, takes it. All spectrum to increase his damage of it. All of a sudden, that's 1/6 of health from a unit that's considerably cheap. And there we go. Next up, artillery, bombarding it. And even here, with command tank on it actually takes some damage. I mean, the artillery shots actually penetrate, and they probably penetrate better than the main hits. So all of a sudden, that Panther 4 is actually taking a lot of damage, and that's just again from the SU76 bombarding it from far away.
Yes, comrade.
And again, now I've got 3. Now I can lay down even bigger barrages. I can really lay down some pressure upon my opponent. Of course, physically, but also psychologically, because again, ultimately, an opponent reacts a bit, oh dear, when he gets bombarded by SU76s. So, I mean, there are a lot of little details to the SU76 which probably shouldn't be forgotten or ignored. Again, they're not going to be holding off against armor on their own. Again, not like that, but again, if you have a nice little screen, for example, or at least, keep them reasonably distant for where the opponent might enter, use a bit of tracking, you can sort of really get off some of the advantages there towards the opponent.
SU76.
And again, you get a lot of them for a very small price. And again, as you saw, one SU76 did a lot of damage to a Panzer 4 all of a sudden, despite only costing half of what that Panzer 4 costs.
SU76, go ahead.
So in that regard, try and keep in mind of that when you're using the SU76. Again, remember, range, it has the same range as the SU5, and with this one, you really want to use its range as much as possible. And of course, if you can use tracking as well, it's the barrage effective in any way, and not just for infantry. I mean, again, if your opponent, for example, has his armor in a particular spot or something like that, don't be afraid of barraging, don't be afraid of stressing out, don't be afraid of damaging overall. I mean, there's a lot to it. And of course, it's probably, again, not going to be a unit for everyone. Again, there's a different unit for everyone. I don't think people should just, disregard the SU6 because, again, it's not an SU85, which I do think is a sort of line of thinking that some players have, which I definitely feel is a shame. And here we have a Panzer 4 being dealt with a bit by some Guards infantry, taking a bit of light damage. Pioneers trying to repair. And we've got the SU6 moving in. Also, some unit went down there to my heavy mortar. And of course, in this case, you also see how effective the Guards infantry can be under the right circumstances. And in this case, partly because my opponent's actually parking his tank right in front of them. But again, the artillery ultimately forced him to move. Other things.
Enemy forces capturing supply sector.
Engagement up here. SU76 is also, by the way, sticking close to each other. I mean, I'm sort of bringing out a bit, sort of small bits, but overall, they will still be able to sort of quickly support each other. And that's, of course, another important thing, because, again, ultimately, when things get dicey, you want them all to be able to focus down the same target. You want them to be able to engage the same unit at the same time. You can't afford to sort of split them up. I mean, that's one thing they're sort of rather vulnerable in as well. But again, you can easily get a bunch of them, and then again, you can easily get a lot of artillery down, and thus cause your opponent a lot of harm. which again is rather the forte of these units. Just lots and lots of fire. It's just about volume with these little SU76 light assault guns. So again, keep that in mind when utilising them. You can of course combine it with marked vehicle, which certainly helps quite a bit as well. Or other abilities, other units, certainly nothing wrong in that. But again, you remember when it comes to the SU6, numbers. It's a numbers game. And again, these are numbers that are easy to acquire, of course a bit harder to hold, but if you know what you're doing, you'll be alright. And again, a few infantry screens, although I don't quite have that here, but again, that's part because I've depleted his infantry through a lot of artillery. In fact, I've got 3 SU76s and heavy mortar, which gives me quite a bit of artillery, which puts quite a bit of harm on his infantry. But even then, a bit of screen somehow, and then of course again, you can get the most out of it. So I hope after having watched this video, you might have gone, that SU76 all of a sudden looks a bit more interesting, because now I understand some of the core concepts behind it, and now I might actually try and use it, at least just for fun, sort of see if I can actually use it again. That's the important thing ultimately though. I mean, if you can use it, then great, because again, it's one of those units that, if handled well, can be absolutely really effective. But again, in the hands of someone who's expecting something else, of course, is going to fail, in particular as a tank, or say a heavy tank destroyer like the SU5. But again, as light assault gun, the trick is get a bunch of them and fire all you can at sort of the same few targets, and you can sort of really actually do a lot of damage. And again, the constant barrages you can get off with them as the veteran job can also put a lot of mental pressure on your opponent. So keep that in mind, and I hope you enjoyed, and I certainly hope you learned something from this Propagandacast Lehr, and certainly were inspired to try for new things, in this case of course the SU76M. And of course, if you were, why not subscribe, tell your friends, let everybody know that you've learned that the SU76 can actually be awesome under the right circumstances in the hands of the right commander, thanks to the Propagandacast. This is Imperial Dane saying cheers.